The best way to make sure you're covered is to not do it alone. You may not know what's covered or not.
I think that's where the radical acceptance comes in, is let's accept them, not try to change the student or fit them into something.
I can't tell you how many times I go into school meetings where a school team will say, well, this is what we can offer the child, but this child needs all these interventions, and you're telling me you can only offer them 80%. The school team decided versus we as a team are deciding. That is a huge red flag. I learned this probably about 5 years ago in working with a lawyer that I partnered with on a case. Be cautious of using the word.
Welcome to the Attention Different podcast. My name is Stephen Tonti. I'm the co-founder of Attention Different. And with me today, co-hosting is
Aaron Smith, and I'm a licensed clinical therapist and co-founder of Attention Different. I also have a coaching practice, Potential Within Reach.
And you can call me story scientist or story mom for the day. Today, we are blessed to have Lisa Richer here with us. Have you ever spent months trying to get anyone to take your gut feelings about your child seriously, only to end up sitting in an individualized education program or IEP meeting, feeling completely lost? We see you. We hear you. And today's guest is the lifeline you've been searching for. Lisa Richer is a neurodiversity consultant and the founder of Journey to Bloom. She built her entire practice out of the hardest years of her own life, fighting for answers on how to help her two neurodivergent sons while also beginning to understand her own brain for the first time. Today, we're going to ask her about the 3 pillars every parent in this space needs to navigate: the internal work required to stop trying to fix your child, the relational work involved in building the right support team around them, and the systemic work of actually pushing schools and institutions into action. Whether you are a parent or caregiver or someone passionate about educating neurodivergent little humans, stick around. We're talking about the challenges of the school system. Lisa, welcome to the Attention Different podcast. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. Wow, that was a really good intro. I'm an empath and a feeler, and I felt that. It was that was really good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah.
You're so welcome. And we are welcome to have you. Aaron, take us away.
All right. So take us back to the beginning. Tell us how your journey started with your kids and how you got into this work.
All right. And I'm taking notes because I don't retain things if I don't, and I'll forget what you asked me. So almost 20 years ago, my oldest will be 20 in December, so not quite 20 yet. It all started. So the journey for my kids started about a week, not even a week into my first son being born. There were differences that were happening at that point. It was him having a hard time swallowing, not wanting to eat. So it started out with some of those physical things. And then within the first 18 months, we had already had him getting assessed for early intervention services. There were things happening that the second week I was a mom, the pediatrician said to me, trust your mom gut because you're spot on. When he wasn't eating, I had a feeling there was something off. Other people were telling me, oh no, he's just an infant. And the pediatrician said, no, you were spot on. There's something going on.
Hey, Stephen here. Sorry to interrupt. We just wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about this week's sponsor. At Attention Different, our mission is simple. Offer ADHD adults proven practical strategies for living a more balanced, fulfilled ADHD life. And that is why we are thrilled to offer our latest course, Thriving with Adult ADHD. While other courses might focus on the pain and struggle of being an adult with ADHD, and we do not want to minimize that, this course is designed around accessible, relevant, and applicable techniques that address the most common challenges facing ADHD adults. Inside Thriving with Adult ADHD, you will learn how to get organized by building routines and habits to bring structure to your days. Regulate your emotions by developing strategies to manage your emotional ups and downs. Learn to manage your energy for productivity without burnout. Thriving with Adult ADHD features 2 hours of on-demand video, 10 downloadable resources, lifetime access to the material, and a satisfaction guarantee. Go to attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. That's attentiondifferent.com/thriving to sign up now. Hey, thanks for the quick break. Now back to the interview.
Yeah, oftentimes parents kind of know, they have this sense that, hey, something isn't right. And unfortunately, a lot of times I think doctors or other people that are well-meaning, not to like cast any shade on them, but I think sometimes they're not there. They're not in your house. They're not in that room. So they don't see what you're seeing. And oftentimes they are kind of introducing this doubt into the conversation, like, oh, well, it might be this, or they explain it off. But you as a parent, sounds like you knew. You kind of had this sense like, I know something's up here. This is my kid.
I did. And it was, he wouldn't nurse. So I'll get very vulnerable here for a moment. And the lactation consultants were like, oh, just keep trying. Just keep trying. Fast forward almost 3.5 years. It wasn't about me trying because my second one had no problem latching on. So but if we back up to that moment, first time parents, my husband's like, what's wrong? Why aren't you, why can't you do this? And then I feel even smaller and smaller and smaller. And I had a emergency C-section. So the birth went from 8 centimeters dilated and no medicine, no epidural, nothing. I'm like, I can do this, to being thrown into labor and having him be butt first. He had flipped within a 24-hour period and lots of chaos ensued. So then, didn't have the birth I expected or hoped for. And then we had all these other, struggles that were happening. And thank goodness for our very first pediatrician, because my younger self that had been suppressed, like, why are you so emotional? Why are you so this? Why are you so that? Don't be so everything. I was all too much. When I became a mom, as I have these conversations with people that are having me on their podcast, I'm learning more and more that it was almost like the rebirth of my younger self, healing my inner child, because everything I felt like I wasn't listened to, I was trusting that inner voice. And that pediatrician, that very first pediatrician, I thank God for her all the time, because, and I'm a very spiritual, I'm not a religious person, so I don't often say that, but she was that very first, within a week of becoming a mom, like, trust your gut. And so it gave me permission to move in that direction right from the very beginning. And so following through that process with the early intervention in Maryland, it's called infants and toddlers. So I had my older son assessed. Then we moved out to the West Coast, and there it's called the regional program. And so we kept on tapping into early interventions, and we still didn't know what was going on or what the neurodifferences were. We just knew there were things happening.
And can I just pause you right there? Can you explain for people that might not know, what exactly is early intervention? Just kind of like, what does that look like for a parent to go through that type of stuff with their child?
So in each state, there is some subset of organizations that you can go through the state to have your child assessed for potential delays.
Developmental delays.
Yes. And so if it is deemed that there's at least a 25% delay against a norm of a typically developing child.
So this is like speech, or, I guess like not at that age, but, No,
actually, at 18 months, speech and language was what my older son, that was what he was first given, was speech. So speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, sometimes even behavioral, depending on, how intense the behaviors are. But most of the time, what I've seen in the 20 years of doing this is speech and language or occupational therapy at the much younger ages. So infants and toddlers, since I'll use the Maryland, I'm living here again now, it's birth through 3 years old. And so in that time frame, if your child qualifies, and you will go through the central office, something called the child find process, and you ask to get assessed, they assess you, run you through a gamut of testing. In Maryland and also in California, those are the 2 states I'm most familiar with the early intervention services. They come to your house, and they have either a speech and language pathologist or an occupational therapist that will come in so many times a week, depending on what you qualified for, and do the interventions at the house, and then do kind of a train the trainer and teach you also how to implement and sustain. What's interesting is in Maryland, we didn't get the amount of follow through that we did in California. In California, in order to get some of the services for my older son, I had to go through training and have parent intervention along with the interventions for my older son. Whereas in Maryland, we didn't have that parent piece, which I felt like fell short. Now, there may be some more of that going on now. And I know there is more parent education, but I actually had to sit through and track and monitor and follow through. So every state does that follow through piece a little bit differently, but there are access points between birth and 3 years old in every state to assess. And if there is a developmental delay, because that's what it will be called at that point, you don't necessarily know what the neurodifference is. For example, is the child's speech and language impairment? Is it ADHD, autism, or a plethora of other potential neurodifferences? Those are the ones that I know are common for a lot of people to wrap their heads around.
Yeah.
That early intervention is, to me, essential. Before I started my own business, I had a blog, which was called Early Intervention Led Me to Bloom, which is, and my business is now Journey to Bloom. But it's that early intervention, the earlier the opportunities to identify, and I don't look at diagnoses as defining, they inform, they don't define. And a lot of parents will come to me and say, I don't want my kid labeled. And I'm guessing maybe, Aaron, on the work you do day to day, people might say the same thing. I believe that you can call it whatever you want, but to me, the more diagnoses I have, the more information I have to appropriately provide or guide people to getting guidance on which interventions are right to help them be able to thrive and have the best chance of having the life that they deserve.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think if you don't know what your child might be dealing with, if you're just shooting in the dark and thinking, let's just wait and see, like, no, actually, I think that's one of the things that parents do that is detrimental to their child's development. Like, actually, they call it early intervention for a reason. You really want to be early on this, and the earlier the better, right? Like that's what the research and evidence has shown.
Yeah. The earlier, the better.
Yeah, all the research points to this, that if you get started early, your child has a better chance of learning those skills. So all those interventions you're talking about, the OT, the PT, different things like that, the speech and language pathologists, those professionals working with the parent and teaching you how to help your kid can be crucial because the brain is developing and the body is developing. Sensory motor skills and things like that are developing. And that's why they're doing this type of work, because it really matters. So, and these are like you mentioned, these are state programs, and parents can get access to these through their insurance, and it's covered. So a lot of these services are covered costs that your insurance can bill for and stuff. So it's not something that you're going to have to necessarily come out of pocket for. I mean, there may be some supplemental things that you'd want to do, but just so people know, like, don't hold back. Don't just sit there and wait and hope it gets better.
Can I dive in a little deeper there, Aaron?
Yeah.
All right. So a couple of things that came up as I'm listening to you. When my now almost 20-year-old, some of that stuff was out of pocket, and we paid a lot of money before we understood what the county or the state was required to do that they didn't do when my oldest, was in that 0 to 3. So,
and what year was this? Like around?
He was born in 2006. So between 2006 and 2009.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So way now, we're much later now. And my younger son, who is 15 now, he also had early intervention. We were in California, but then we had moved back here when he was very young. And so my younger one only had interventions in Maryland, whereas my older one had them in both Maryland and in California. Interestingly, though, I also want to just say, like, the earlier the better, yes. And if your gut is saying there's more going on, don't let go of it. Just track it and journal it. That's something that I learned really early on with my older son. Initially, it was, it's just speech and language. However, there were a lot of things that when we look back now, we're identifying him as a child on the autism spectrum. Mm-hmm. Back then, it was autism spectrum. And they still use that term, but there were lots of things. So he was a toe walker. He was a hand flapper. He would get dysregulated beyond belief. And sometimes for an hour at a time, you got to give him like a huge bear hug and just to get him to like calm down and relax and the pressure points. But for a while, people said it was just speech and language. Then it was, oh, it's just behavioral. Then it was he has a vision issue when really he was squinting because he had visual processing disorder. And so he was trying, or overstimulation. So he was trying to squint so he didn't get all that outside stimulation. When we journaled it, the reason I bring up the journal, when we journaled it and we have a behavioralist with him, and we noticed the differences when the behavioralist was there, we called him our shadow. And when he wasn't there to regulate and refocus, we realized that the environment was a big part of the triggers. In addition, there was also social interaction struggles. He would throw rocks at a kid to get their attention. He wasn't being mean. He didn't know how to communicate. So it was like he was born with scratches on his CD-ROM. And had we not gone through the 3 years of trial and error and me not giving up, you had mentioned the wait and see. My parents at one point said, it's just going to go away. And then a year and a half later, they were like, wow, look how great things are. And I'm like, yeah, 10,000 plus later out of pocket, he's here because we did all these interventions. And so,
hell yeah.
Wow. So you came out of your pocket for
a lot of it,
because you didn't even know that some of this stuff could be covered.
We were told it wasn't. And then when I finally got in touch with a behavioral psychologist in California, in Maryland, we were covered. And we got to California and we were told no for certain things. And then our behavioral psychologist was like, oh, no, that should have been covered. So then we went back to the county that we were in and ended up getting things covered between 4 and 5.5 under a different program.
But of course you didn't get money back for the money spent.
Oh gosh, no. We spent well over $10,000 in tons of different interventions, but I would do it all again.
Just for parents, how do you make sure that things are covered? What are the elements that you need to do with your doctors to make sure that, like, I'm looking into those resources that my insurance and the state can provide, so I'm not having to go out of pocket?
It can take a lot of digging. And so one of the ways, Aaron, that I work with clients, and I call myself two things, either a neurodiversity consultant or a neurodivergent success partner. It just really depends on kind of what atmosphere and who I'm working with. I do have my special education advocacy certifications. I have an executive functioning certification, a parent behavioral certification, and I have a background in corporate HR leadership and training and development. I say that because I'm very different than many advocates that are out there. But what I will say is if you find someone, whether their background's eclectic like mine, or they're an advocate that understands the system and the nuances of who are those outside service providers, who are the county or the state or whatever's out there for you to help you connect those dots and bridge those gaps. So the best way to make sure you're covered is to not do it alone. Because had I not been introduced to that behavioral psychologist when someone saw my kid melt down at a little gym with all the overstimulation that he had going on and introduced me to this behavioral psychologist, who then led to me building my dream team, which is partly what I model my practice after, like on that conduit to all the outside providers, you may not know what's covered or not. So find a person. Sometimes they're free. I know in Maryland, there's a company called Parents Place in Maryland that covers the whole state. I definitely know there's places in Colorado that work with different types of neurodifferences. There are the state-funded mandates when you're in that birth through 3 range. There's also things when you're in 3 through 5 or 5.5 or 6, depending on when you go into kindergarten. So each state has different free things that you can get guidance, like the guidance I offer. And then there's certain things that they can't offer you because they maybe don't have the bandwidth to do it. But don't do it alone. That would be the best way to make sure you're covered, is to not do it alone.
Yeah. Like I'm looking here. There's a few different organizations and stuff that I think if you go to the CDC.gov website, you can kind of look on there and search by your territory, your locale, and find some different agencies and intervention agencies that are there. I'm just looking here, California, since we mentioned that, Early Start, and then also Colorado, Early Intervention Colorado. Yeah, and I think what your role, like kind of some of your specialty is there, is like assembling these pieces. There's all these pieces of the puzzle, and you as a parent went through this system and had to figure this all out yourself. And you're kind of like, all right, let me save you some time and probably some money too, and help you like not have to question, what do I do and where do I go and how does this all work? You kind of get parents there faster. You help to advocate for them and with them to find and assemble all of these elements that are really hard to navigate alone.
Absolutely. And I would say time and sanity. I can't guarantee I'm
Yeah.
saving money because my services do cost. But I think in the long term, I would definitely say we're saving money as well. But definitely time and sanity and access to the appropriate interventions necessary for your child to have the best opportunity to thrive, not just through academics, but honestly in life. And so I would say that, and so that piece that you're talking about is what I call well, there's a couple of things. I have a journey map that's clarity, confidence, courage, but I also have offerings. So on my site talks about the clarity offering, and that really is it's a journey map of figuring out who are all those resources like you just described, Aaron. And I have like a one pager that I've just finally finalized in a way that I can share it with people. And it doesn't even have everything on it. Every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, I missed a potential outside service provider that could help, because there's always different avenues depending on the child's unique circumstances and the parent's unique
Right.
needs. But there are places to start, at least to get going and to know you have that basic team. And the way that I would say one of the biggest gifts I give to people is an objective perspective, because they're not my children. It's not my family. So I do get emotional and I feel what's going on in the family, but I take the emotional connection out of it because it's not my family. So when I'm working with the school teams and I'm working with the parents, and I'm sitting in a meeting, I always tell them, I'm here because the parents hired me. I'm here in collaboration with the school team, but I'm really here for the child. That's who we're all here for. And if we're not here for the child, we might be in the wrong place. And I don't mean that with any contentiousness, but the child is what we're doing there. And it's not to fit a square peg in a round hole. Like, I can't tell you how many times I go into school meetings where a school team will say, well, this is what we can offer the child. And especially in like a transition from like an elementary to a middle school circumstance.
Mhm.
And I'll say, but this child needs all these interventions in order to access FAPE, free and appropriate public education, because they have all these needs. And you're telling me you can only offer them 80%. Well, then that's not an appropriate education. What other options do we have? And the elementary team will go, well, they said they can only do this, so let's change. No. We have to look at the child. We're not going to change what we're offering them because a school doesn't offer it. We're going to
Right.
make it what the child needs to access as a non-disabled peer. And then if we can't do it at our local school, we need to find a more appropriate placement for them. And that's another place where I come in, because when emotions get high, sometimes the school teams unintentionally and the parents unintentionally are like, oh, let's just not have controversy. Let's just make it work. And that's not appropriate.
It may not be in the best interest of the child.
Exactly.
Like they may do better in a different environment or different kinds of interventions.
Yes.
This all strikes a chord with me, but I want to flip the coin. I'm going to do something perhaps clever. Toss and flip the coin. Right now, we've been talking about needs, which I imagine school systems and adults of all sorts see as, quote, problems, right? Challenges, barriers. I'm curious what part of your practice includes the discussion of radical acceptance, right? Educating and consulting school teams and parents on the assets that a neurodiverse child presents to their class, to a room, to a school system. So, you talk about something that resonates with a lot of our listeners, the idea that neurodiversity isn't a problem to solve. It's the prism lighting the table, right? What does it mean to bring neurodiversity into a room as an asset rather than a deficit? And how do you yourself define radical acceptance when you're working with these parents and with these teachers? I'm imagining listeners would love to have that card carrying response or that sort of like soapbox pitch that they can give to teachers like, hey, I'm kind of sick and tired and fed up of defending my child's needs. I would like to celebrate my child's assets for a second, please.
Yeah, this really strikes a chord, because you go into a school meeting and they talk about the celebrations, but oftentimes the celebrations have nothing to do with those assets that relate to those neurodifferences. It's like, oh,
Right.
he's kind, he's nice, he's this, he's that. Okay, but what are the assets, those neurodifferences that make them stand out and unique, and yes, make you uncomfortable because we're challenging the status quo. We're challenging that social norm. And so when I talk about it, I'll go from two aspects here. One, I do different workshops across organizations, and sometimes school systems will bring me in for that too. I wish more did. And those that do often say, we'd love to implement this, but, and so, okay, nothing's going to truly change, and we're not going to ever have that radical acceptance if we don't educate. And so I talk about understanding neurotypes and how to communicate across them. And then I also talk about leading and engaging across them. And one of the things that
Wait, so neurotypes, can you define that for us? Because that's for people that may not know or have heard that term. Tell us what the difference of that is versus, I don't know, some disorder or some other kind of mental condition that is presenting. What is a neurotype exactly?
Yep. So I will say, so I don't call anything a condition and I don't call it a disorder, because truly to me, it's just different. And under the neurodiversity umbrella, which is where I'm going to go to the neurotypes, what is considered neurotypical is typical by what society deems typical. And so everyone, not even those of two identical twins, have the exact same brain. So in some ways, we're all neurodifferent. That was like my favorite thing. I was doing a research for a keynote a couple of years ago, and I was like, that's fascinating, not even identical twins. So neurotypes, that when I talk about that, I talk about the neurodiversity umbrella. And so it's anything from ADHD, anxiety, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. So the specific learning disabilities. It can be oppositional defiance disorder, and some of them do say disorder, but I talk about things as coexisting neurodifferences. So your diagnosis can be called whatever the medical doctor calls it, but I look at them as truly just differences in the way that we think, learn, and process and see the world.
Yeah. And I just to clarify, because I heard you mention anxiety, like things like depression or anxiety, those are things that we're not born with, right? We're born with certain types of traits and predispositions. Babies, infants are born with these kind of things. Some people are a little more shy, some are more outgoing, some are a little more fearful. Some have a lot of high energy and some have higher needs in certain areas. Some have more sensitivities. But those kind of things, I would classify those are more of the disorders, right? Those are the mood disorders or the disorders that we develop later in life. Whereas neurotypes, these are developmental, right? These are neurobiological and developmental. And those are things we're born with. And they're the way that our brain is, right? It's the way that our brain is wired and is wired differently, as you said. So I just want to kind of like differentiate that for our listeners so they can understand, like, because this is a point of confusion of like, well, isn't ADHD similar to some of these other things? And no, like if someone has autism, ADHD, that is who they are. That's their brain. It's their brain wiring. And yes, we can help with a lot of these interventions and stuff to help mitigate some of the challenges that they face, existing and living, interfacing in the world that it may not be set up for them. And to also, like Steven said, highlight some of those strengths and leverage those beautiful characteristics and capacities that make them who they are and help them shine in those ways. But we need to understand that it's who this person is, and every person is different.
Absolutely.
One of the most challenging conversations I have, I'm curious, Lisa, if you've had this with parents, also teachers, though I imagine it's both in the professional realm and in the personal realm. I'm starting to have a nuanced version of the I read this online somewhere conversation, right? Or I heard this on a podcast or this, that, the third. And it'll come from genuinely a very positive and empathetic and compassionate, sometimes a parent or like an aunt or an uncle of somebody
Mhm.
who's ADHD or maybe ADHD in their family. And the most recent one happened like a week ago. And they'll very positively and sort of euphorically say, oh, there's new studies, right? There's all this stuff about the myelin sheath, and it's proving that, like, you know, ADHD and bipolar are the same, or like ADHD and schizophrenia are the same, or this, that thing. And I kind of have to like take a moment and pause and like go through my computer brain and like every mentor lecture I've ever had and be like, how do I consolidate all this into like 2 sentences? And what ends up coming out, because we don't have time and I'm loading my car, is here's my email. I've got some documents. I've got documents you need to read. I have some alternate views. But I find what I think upsets and unrests me in those conversations very quickly is the ironic contrast of somebody very positively and compassionately saying, I found the secret, right? But the
Mhm.
secret is still kind of fix-based language, like something to be fixed. Oh, it's their myelin sheath is broken, or this, that, and third. And again, my gut is retching, right? Because I want to say, wait, like this is a neurotype. This is a different brain wiring. It's who they are. Please stop looking for the national treasure secret
Yeah.
and radically accept your nephew for how they're wired. And don't, I end up saying, like, we need to have a conversation after this fact because there's too many people around and I don't want to yell. But I wonder if you have some of those barriers in the realm of the fix the child conversation, you know, the misinformation and disinformation. And even if it comes from a positive and compassionate place, an excited
Mhm.
place, it's still like, how do you respond to that teacher, that parent who's like, I've got the answer, I found this thing on WebMD, you know, that moment?
Yeah, so I take a deep breath and I try to not respond right away because I don't want to react, right? And so similar to what you're saying, Stephen, it stops me in my tracks, but it also makes me recognize we have a long way to go and that my job will never be done and changing the thoughts for one person to help them
That's right.
understand we don't need to fix anyone. And I would say, like, if we're talking back to like just radical acceptance in general, my greatest gift as a parent is that I have allowed my kids to be authentically themselves no matter what. And
Mhm.
so I practice radical acceptance every day in my house, with my family, with others that don't get it or accept it. And I've been doing that since I became a mom. I don't feel like I was accepted for many, many years. And now today, still, if people don't accept me, well, then I just separate myself from them. But what I also do for others as it relates to parents and teachers is talk about, you may think about this differently. Here's how they think about it. So let's
Mm,
try to meet in the middle and learn something from it. And
mm.
so, even just going back to learning preferences, whenever I'm talking with people around educating around different neurodifferences, and I just learned something different here too, because I understand what you're saying about anxiety, depression comes from something. Like, one of the things that I talk about sometimes is how when we talk about neurotypes, they can be in response to something like a PTSD will rewire, right, how your brain's thinking, but it's not
Right,
something
right.
like Aaron's that you're born with. So it does get confusing.
Totally.
I try to remove those pieces to what you were saying, right? I just read this, or I found this, or here's the golden ticket. Sometimes I'll actually say, yeah, I've been down that road too. My oldest, when he was diagnosed autistic, take him off dairy and take him off gluten, and it'll fix everything.
Yeah, the leaky gut. If I hear the phrase leaky gut one more time in my adult life, it may send me off of a cliff. Good, but yeah.
And guess
Yeah.
what it did? It got him to hate milk. He doesn't drink milk still to this day, and he's almost 20. And he loved milk. And it got him to hate some of the snacks until I could convince him that it wasn't a gluten-free snack that I was giving him, had to show him
Mm,
bags, and it caused more meltdowns instead of less. So it didn't regulate him
well,
anymore. It didn't do anything that the magic bullet, right, was
right.
supposed to do for him. And so when I'm talking with parents or teachers or educators that see these things, I say, take it with a grain of salt. If it works for your child, that's great. but everybody has different neurobiology. Everyone has different genes. What's going to work for one may not work for another. Do you have any idea how many people were in that research study? Who was it done by? You can choose to go down those paths. But for me, I say trust your gut, because had I listened to all the outside people, and in terms of all the best intentions, my best friend, since I was teeny tiny, like I was 5 years old when I met her, at one point in time before she became a certified occupational therapy assistant, she had said to me at one point, she had 3 kids that were already like not quite teenagers yet, but between like 9 and 12. And she's like, give them to me for a weekend and I'll fix them. She doesn't even remember saying this to me. I'm like, fix them. And we talk about this now, so I can say it out loud. But she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I ever said that to you. And now as an OT, and she works a lot with kids that are autistic, she helped me figure out that my younger son, who has ADHD, many learning differences, also a visual processing disorder, because of how he wasn't tracking and all these things that were going on with him. And now, like, she'll say, hey, have you thought about getting him assessed with the eye doctor? I'm like, his eyesight's fine. She's like, no, the way he's tracking seems off to me. So even her language changed as she became more educated. So what I share with people is go talk to people that know more than what you just read. Go check in with people about your unique circumstance and get a big picture, and then make an informed decision.
Yeah, check with the experts and people that have the degrees and have studied this field.
Yeah, this is where my more documents comment comes from.
And get second opinions.
I have second and third opinions.
And there's always the thing with research, right? There's always studies or sensational journalism that comes out.
Yeah.
And it's always those ones that are counterintuitive or counter the societal norms of what we think that make the biggest splash.
Yeah, what doctors aren't telling you in the headline.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. What they don't want you to know. What this
they
and
don't
this.
want you to know.
And yeah, those, of course, they cause shockwaves, and people are like, what? You know, like, for instance, there was this one, and this doesn't have anything to do with like exactly what we're talking about, but it just reminds me, because one of my friends came to me with this information. It was something he saw online, and he's just like, oh, do you know that you can't have strawberries and bananas in your smoothie anymore because the flavanols or whatever, or something, right? Like they're, you know, you're not getting as many nutrients because of da 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 da. Well, there was like some kind of research that came out, and then it made a huge splash on social media, and then people went around and spread a bunch of this stuff. But then when you talk to the nutritional scientists and nutritionists and people that are out there and doctors, they're like, you know, actually there's a lot of different things that are going on with those healthy fruits. And like, you know, that small reduction in this one thing is actually not a huge deal. And it's probably better for you to have this smoothie and not worry about it, because people are not getting enough fruits and vegetables in their diet overall. So forget that, right? And like, that's the thing, is like, we like to hone in on that sensational thing that we hear on social media or from someone else. And we need to double check those facts and understand that research is always changing. And the best thing you can do is say, okay, how many people are actually citing this? How big was this study? Is it brand new? If this is brand new, maybe let's give it a little bit to see how the scientific community and other people really interact with this. Let's not jump to make some decision right now in our lives. Like, okay, let's raid the pantry and get rid of all of these things to change this right away.
A lot more than I would like to admit. I see people do that, right? Yeah.
I just had a parent in an intro call the other day tell me, she said it in this way, like, I was reading that ADHD meds cause dementia. And I said, wait a second. I was like, I don't know where you read that, because I don't think she read it. I think she heard it on social media. Because I'm like, there's zero evidence of that. Zero. Like that is not a thing. Like, it's actually the complete opposite, right? They provide those very same types of stimulants to treat things like Alzheimer's. And it's been shown to be helpful in neurodegeneration in the elderly. So I don't know. Like, that's the thing. We got to check this stuff and really make sure we're speaking from a base of knowledge and not just running on assumptions. I think what I wanted to ask you about is, so we were talking about kind of the fixing versus the understanding your child. And you were telling us kind of about your best friend who's the OT, who kind of has started to evolve in her thinking and her language around all these things. I think coming to it from a place of how do we understand our children as if you're a parent out there, or as a teacher, how do you understand your students and what their needs are, and not trying to fit them in? I think that's where the radical acceptance comes in, is let's accept them, not try to change the student or fit them into something, fit them into a mold of behavior that we think is appropriate or we think is quote unquote normal or something, right? Typical, average, whatever. You hear these different things. No, how do we understand what their needs are? Because behavior is a communication, it's a signal. It's a way for that child, that student, to communicate a need to you. They're showing you something with that behavior. And just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that there isn't meaning in there. There is something that's very important for you to be gleaning from that behavior.
I wanted to underline something that illuminated for me what, based on Aaron just said, the other side of that coin. It's also not appropriate necessarily to convince a child to change their version of communication so that you, an adult, understand it better. I don't think I've heard it that way before, but that's actually a very cruel expectation that adults put on children. Like, just because I don't understand the need you are trying to convey, I'm going to put you through this pipeline of translation, like literally forcing you to learn a different communication style that is not unique to you or normalized for you, such that I understand you better, is actually quite selfish in a way that I hadn't heard before. Like, for an adult, like a competent adult, to be like, hey, I'm not understanding you. And instead of trying to understand the way that you're trying to communicate this feeling, I'm going to force you to learn this entire different set of feelings communication so that I understand you. And it's like, what a rude and awful thing to expect a 10-year-old to do.
You just described my childhood.
Yeah, right.
I grew up being misunderstood. I grew up, why would you think that? Why would you say that? That doesn't make sense, constantly. And so I do a lot of what you all are talking about here with my kids. And when I was saying, like, as a parent, the best thing I've ever done is let my kids be authentically themselves. They help others understand them better, because they are free to be themselves. I went through a 30-some-year period where I was anything but myself. And then as I became a mom, I was ensuring that my kids were free to be themselves. And now I'm at that stage in my life now too.
We call this unmasking, right? Like in the neurodiversity community, it's not trying to put on that social mask that others to fit in. It's allowing yourselves to, it's allowing your child to be their authentic self. It's giving ourselves permission to be our more authentic selves in different.
Does that ring true for you, Lisa? You hesitated a bit.
Yes. And though, because I spent so many years camouflaging and masking, that I actually had to also unlearn behaviors and language that others told me were appropriate for my way of thinking, learning, and seeing the world. So I actually literally had to unbecome what somebody else and society had me change into, and
you were socialized into,
fully unmask and be free to be me. So it was a much harder, and I actually ended up in burnout, and through the last 6 years I've been in burnout cycles, but I was like on the couch, ashes of burnout. And I had to literally peel back layers of 30-some years in order to unlearn, recognize what wasn't mine to hold on to, things that weren't mine to solve for, and then recognize, wow, I'm gifting my kids all these things that I wasn't gifted.
How does that show up for your kids? Like you said, you're parenting them different than how you were parented, and you're giving them this gift of being who they are.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, it comes across in lots of different ways. So, for example, if when my older son was younger, he did something, we used to call it the crazy dance. And he would just be like, "Oh." And it's funny because sometimes he'll do it as an adult. He'll probably kill me if he hears this podcast. But sometimes he'll do it as an adult in a little bit of a different way. And I'll start laughing and I'll say, "You had this whole dance you used to do." And we would show it to him. And it was him, he was regulating in his own body. And people
Totally.
over the years would say, "What are you letting him do? Like, that's just odd. Like, don't let him do that." Or he would just be so transparent and call people out on things that people
Yeah.
didn't like to hear. But it really was the truth. And so I wouldn't stop him from speaking the truth. My younger son is very hyperactive, oftentimes impulsive. We work with him to bring those impulsivities down. He's working on it, but he'll be super silly and just be off the cuff in so many different ways. And I don't stop him from allowing his own personality to come through. I help him understand that not everyone's going to want to be around him when either he changes his mind 15 times or he can't regulate or he is being super silly and someone just wants him to go somewhere and calm down. So I allow them to be who they are while teaching them that if you are unable to learn to regulate and control in certain environments, you may push some people away, you may bring others to you, and you can allow yourself to step away to calm down or do whatever you need to do and then come back. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it who you are.
That's excellent.
Yeah, like that, really excellent. Clip it, right, Aaron? Clip that line. I want to send a message of compassion and love to your son out there. An ex of mine and good friend from college, who is a theater director, ADHD, but like high capacity, born and raised in the Upper West Side, Manhattan. Sharp cookie. She did something very silly. She called it the silly dance. And I've brought this up before, and it was with actors in her shows. It was with friends. We were at a very demanding, stressful academy, Carnegie up in Pittsburgh. And imagine you walked by the classroom and there's this 20-something with a group of 20-somethings, eyes shut, dancing around like wet noodles, right? Like she would do something called the silly dance. And it was meant to ward off shame, embarrassment, to get into your body, to feel every extension of your digits and your phalanges and whatnot. And coming from her in particular was a delightful, ironic contrast, because here was this person, Upper West Side Manhattan, very like put together all the time. And then all of a sudden she'd be like, "Okay, guys, we need to do a minute and a half of silly dance." And the rules were you must close your eyes and keep them shut. And then there are no other rules, right? Dance for a minute and a half, as crazy and as wacky and as silly as you can. So, I see that ADHD, ADHD spectrum, and I both find it silly, but also vital, significant, endearing, important, right? To let people express themselves in that way. It's so non-threatening, and it's bizarre that we societally consider it as threatening, even a little bit.
Well, it's odd and it's different, and the behavior,
Right.
I remember even with my oldest, at one point that somebody said he has to go to PT or he's never going to be able to walk on his flat feet because he walked on his toes for so long. And what I learned at one point was him walking on his toes was tightening his calf muscles. So it was actually helping him regulate as well. And so now, he's fine. He walks on his flat feet. He's fine. And then as a gymnast, I grew up undiagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed ADHD until I was 49, 48.
Whoa.
And so, but I was in the gym spinning and flipping and doing all these things for so many years. My body I was my best, most free self. And I understand as an adult what made me so comfortable in the gym training 5 to 8 hours a day, depending on what time of year it was, more comfortable and regulated than I ever was at home or in school. Because everything my body needed to be regulated and focused, I got when I was in that gym.
Thanks for mentioning that, because that kind of really tees up the next question that I was going to ask about, which is about interventions in schools, the IEP process, how to advocate for certain things like that. Because you mentioned it can be a tough environment, right? To switch from being in the gym, kind of having this free space for your body to move, and you're working through all this tension and energy and whatever else is flowing through your system. And then you have to be set right back into this school environment where it's sit down, pay attention, be here, be around all these other students, do things the way that they want you to do it. And for you as an advocate and working with parents, what are some of those things you wish parents would know about the IEP process and about some interventions for people that have no idea of what to do to kind of stand up for your child's needs?
It's such a hard question to answer because the interventions are unique to the individual.
Yeah. And even just like a general about the process of like, what are your rights and what things
Right,
can you do?
right.
Okay, got it.
And do you just accept what the school, because I've been in these rooms, I've seen this with like,
Boy, howdy, do I remember Aaron's woes from this.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The school will come with a pre-written out, pre-filled in IEP a lot of times and say, here it is. We've come up with all these things for your child, sign it. Right. And I just want to know, like, from your experience, like, what are the parents' rights in that situation? What can they do?
First thing I'll say is, yes, it happens. It happens way more frequently than I would like it to. Even assessments get done and school teams make decisions without the parents. They predetermine coming into a meeting. That is not legal. So I will tell you as a parent or anybody that's listening, that is not legal. Parents are a part of the IEP team. They are part of the assessment review. It is required for them to be able to meaningfully participate, which means their voices are needed to be heard. Anything you bring in from the outside need to be at least reviewed and assessed. And if they need more data, then the school team can say, I need to add more data. It's very disheartening to me when I hear a school team say, well, the school team decided, rather than we as a team are deciding. The school team decided versus we as a team are deciding. That is a huge red flag. It's happened very recently for me in a client meeting. At that point in time, you have the right to reach out to whoever is in your central office. Every school system has a team that sits outside of the school where they're supposed to be objective people
that you can kind of appeal it to and get a second opinion.
You can appeal it up. Like, so I'll give a perfect example. So we have, there's a family I'm working with right now where the data shows that we really need to assess a child for dyslexia, given the screeners in the early years of elementary. We asked for it to be added to an assessment. We were shut down twice. Mom has now created a grid of the data on a colored thing showing that this child did really well at these upper areas, but the core competencies that you need to know to truly be able to read, write, spell, there are major gaps. And so we're asking for that full assessment that was never done because the school, we found out, had determined a couple of things. I'm not going to go into all the details. We're now going to the central office team we're going to add them into the email and once again, ask for these assessments to be done based on the data that we're providing and expressing that we were denied this without conversation. And so whether I'm in the room with them, these are rights that the parents have to be able to meaningfully participate. Now, there are some times that you may want like extra breaks or sensory breaks for your child. Maybe they're being very distracting to others in the classroom and they're saying it's a behavioral problem. In that case, you may want to call a meeting with the school. They might not necessarily have a 504 plan or an IEP, but maybe there's some distractibility. It could be something as simple as the child needs a fidget. Those aren't things you actually have to get a 504 for. That accommodation can be accommodated. Talking about radical acceptance and meeting people where they are. If a kid needs to get up and do jumping jacks or stand in the back of a room but can still listen, if I'm not taking notes, I'm not listening. As we referenced about 15 minutes ago when I was like, what were we talking about? Because I was listening to you, but I wasn't writing it down. So I completely forgot what I had just heard because I don't recall unless I write it down. But even in corporate, I was told often, you're not listening if you're writing. Well, it was actually the inversion.
Yeah.
I wasn't listening if I wasn't writing. And so then I was interjecting and then I wasn't even following along. And so sometimes that radical acceptance really just comes to figure out, and I know now I remember what I was going to say because I'm back to that. Not appropriate to change an adult to ask a child to change how they process or hear something so that the adult can understand it, right? So I think that was the topic we were on. So we come full circle, meeting kids where they are, meeting adults even where they are, getting curious and asking questions instead of asking someone to conform to how you say something will bring all of us together so much faster, and we might actually learn something in the process.
Shocking.
Yes.
There's a little facetiousness in that
Yes.
comment.
Yeah, and these laws are there to protect the child's rights and the family's rights, to provide the best educational environment with the least amount of kind of constraints on the child's learning. Because a lot of times before, and this was back in the 80s and 90s, where they would pull the kids out and they'd put them in these specialized classrooms, and and it would just be this terrible place that, like, they weren't actually getting quality education. They were falling behind. There was so many problems with that type of a model. And now it's about finding some of those least restrictive environments for the child's learning and to meet their needs and to do things like you mentioned, taking a break, or the placement of the child in the classroom, sitting near the front, or having their own ability to get up and go to a corner and have some stimulation area, or to have certain things that are helpful for that child's learning.
Mhm.
And we got to figure that out. And so the 504 is really, and it's called 504 because it's the section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So this is part of some civil rights law that governs this stuff.
Mhm.
And also the IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Program, that is kind of a higher level. So the 504 has a little bit less teeth, right? It's like the child qualifies for some of these things, but in reality, and the way it works is that the schools don't oftentimes follow through as appropriately as if a child has an IEP. There's more governing law and consequences if they don't follow through. And so a lot of times I see this with families, like if your child is put on a 504 right away, but they really need to qualify for an IEP, even if the school is telling you, oh, well, your child isn't doing bad enough, or they're not failing, or they're not, their grades aren't horrible, they don't qualify. If there's specific reasons that you feel that you disagree with that perspective, that's where you can get some of these appeals, and you can also advocate for their needs, especially when it comes to things like specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, other learning disabilities like that, auditory processing disorders, stuff like that. That's where we need to have parents know their rights. And if you're curious, just parents that are out there listening to this saying, well, where else do I get this information, right? One of the best websites that I know of too that's out there, they even break it down in terms of what you can advocate for, how to write an IEP letter and stuff. What are some of those interventions? It's understood.org.
Yeah, it's one of the resources on my site. I was wondering if that's what you're going to reference.
Yep. I love understood.org. And they have podcasts and they have all sorts of stuff. So you can just go to their website, search for this stuff. They have a plethora of helpful resources.
Can I go into the differences real quick between the 504 and the IEP? So if people are watching, I made a couple of faces because sometimes the 504 gets implemented better than an IEP and vice versa. And there's lots of different nuances. One of the things I want to make sure people understand, so there's a subset of qualifying disabilities in order to qualify for either a 504 or an IEP. You can find that information right on understood.org, like you said, Aaron. But a 504 plan are supplemental aids and the accommodations. A 504 plan does not include specially designed instruction. And so when people say to me, what's the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP? The most simplistic thing that I can go to is an IEP is when a child requires specially designed instruction to have appropriate access as their same age, non-disabled peers. And so that's a nuance that's really important because, and that specially designed instruction could be around the social emotional, it can be around behavioral, or it can be specifically designed instruction related to academics. You can also have a 504 plan with accommodations and a reading intervention with a reading specialist. In some states, if you have an IEP, the special educator does the reading interventions. And I will tell you, I learned this firsthand. As good as a special educator is, they are not trained like a reading specialist. And a reading specialist is going to give you the appropriate instruction for someone that has one of the Ds, right? Dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. They're going to help you more intentionally because they're trained in those interventions. So sometimes having the 504 for the accommodations along with a different intervention outside of an IEP isn't necessarily a bad thing. What happens though is when you don't know what you don't know, and you're not leaning into someone like myself or someone else that you reach out to, then you don't know what's most appropriate for your child. The one last thing, it's a nuance, but I learned this probably about 5 years ago in working with a lawyer that I partnered with on a case. Be cautious of using the word best. Use the word appropriate. Because in a school setting, a free and appropriate public education does not mean the most highly qualified best education. It just means appropriate to have equal access just as your non-disabled peers. So it seems nuanced, but what I learned was when you are fighting, and I say fighting because that's usually what happens, for a more restrictive environment that's appropriate, when you use the word best, some teams will turn it against you when really what you're talking about is most appropriate.
Yeah, I hear that.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying those points. So we're kind of wrapping up towards the end. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wish we should have talked about or needed to talk about that you'd like to talk about? Any last pieces of advice or perspective?
I would say a couple of things. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help.
Definitely.
No one needs to do this alone. And I know those were almost the same thing said 5 different ways. And you can find that on my website too, like things I wish I knew early on. But having a team of people around me that led me to be able to create Journey to Bloom the way that I run my consultancy, had I not understood how many different experts I needed that knew things better than I did, different than I did, that together we were able to come and give my kids the best opportunity to be successful, not just through school, but in life. And I still miss the boat on a lot of things because I still don't know what I don't know. But knowing that there's others out there, don't go it alone because you will save a lot of time. You will save a lot of sometimes money, but definitely your sanity. We're coming back to that. We talked about that earlier on. Your sanity will stay in check so much better when you surround yourself with people that are willing to accept what's going on, even if they don't understand it. So that's the last thing I would say is if you're around family members that just say, oh, I read this or I saw this or this will fix this, it's not about fixing it. It's about meeting the child where they are and helping to forge a path that makes sense for them, even if it doesn't make sense for you.
Yeah.
Well said.
I relate to exactly what you said. In building my business, building my practice, what I do with my clients, it's not that I have all of the answers. It's not that I'm fixed or have somehow discovered all of the things to do. No, it's that it's this parallel process of growth that we learn and we discover more and we help people understand themselves and the systems that they have to interface with better. And that's precisely what you're doing is you're helping those parents navigate these very complex webs of services, supports, and assemble that team that's going to be there for them and for their child in ways that can help them thrive and develop into that version of themselves that we want them to be. That we're all about attention different is to be that beautiful, different version of you with those unique capacities, strengths, and abilities, and just live the life that you're meant to live.
You mentioned earlier about my internal, relational, and systemic. I think this is a good time to just tease that for a moment. It aligns with my clarity, confidence, courage journey map. And the clarity is that internal, what's going on internally? Why are you coming to me? I talk about the who, the what, and the how, but the word why stresses me out because I was always asked, why are you to this? Why are you to that? So my clients bring me their why. And then we go through what is that internal? What are we getting clear on? What are the things that are you're struggling with or what brought you here. And then we go into the confidence piece, which is that relational. We talked a lot about that here, those relationships and what that means. And then the courage to move through the system, the systemic struggles or issues or differences in a way that get you to solving for that why you came to me in the first place. And I think we did a really nice job here today. Hopefully people followed it and really bringing it all back to when you can get clear and confident and courageous on the internal, the relational, and that systemic, then doors open. And it sounds like, Aaron, when you were describing what you do in your business, you're meeting people where they are also. We're not trying to solve or fix it for them either. Yep. We're a navigation to help them figure it out for themselves.
Well said. Well said. Well, Stephen, now's the time.
Well, we have come to the end of our show. First and foremost, we're going to get your pluggables. Where can the people find you? And then we'll end with a breath and say goodbye for the day. So pluggables first. Where can the people find your excellent and deeply important information?
You can find me, my website, journey2bloom.com. You can email me, lisa@journey2bloom.com. Very simple. Instagram and YouTube @journey2bloom. And then my name, Lisa, either Lisa Richer or Lisa Lazar Richer for LinkedIn and Facebook.
Very cool. Well, with a debt of gratitude and even more wisdom than I came in with today, thank you very much. We're going to all take a collective breath. Inhale. Exhale. And for all of those listeners who are fighting the good fight, as Lisa described, remember to breathe. You've got this. This is the Attention Different Podcast. Thank you for listening.
And don't forget to follow and subscribe for more.
The Attention Different Podcast is hosted by me, Stephen Tonti.
And me, Aaron Smith.
The Attention Different Podcast is produced by David Grabowski, who also wrote the theme music.
Edited by David Grabowski and Ian Lopez.
Visit us at attentiondifferent.com, where you can learn more about our team, discover resources, and much, much more.
We're on Instagram at attention_different.
And you can watch all our episodes like this one, plus tons more free content on youtube.com/@attentiondifferent.